got that cherry bomb.
Welcome to Breaking Beauty Podcast, Carolina. So just days after this episode goes to air, it will be International Women's Day. I mean, I'm still on the team of making 365 days a year International Women's Day, but we'll take this day, okay? So prior to founding OneSkin, you co-founded a Brazilian biotech startup that produced human cells from stem cells. And this is, I feel like, the kind of technology that makes waves and that people are kind of, looking to invest in. We see big players like L'Oreal do this. So what can you tell us about that background and how it's helped inform what you're doing now?
So we were all researching stem cell biology, tissue engineering, and one of the applications of this research is basically to grow human tissues in the lab, so you can test new products or new drugs and evaluate both like toxicity and safety. And it's a very advanced, technology that unfortunately we didn't find a lot of demand in Brazil from the market. But we did find more traction from the cosmetic industry. Mm-hmm. And as you well pointed, like L'Oreal has been doing this for maybe, over 20, 30 years, but very few companies have this knowledge of like growing skins and using this skin, in vitro or synthetic skins, whatever you want to call, to test their products. And we saw that more cosmetic companies want to use this model because obviously you should not test in animals. And it is the best way to predict how a product will perform in humans. And clinical studies, human studies are always more expensive. Mm-hmm. So if you're able to validate this in the lab and get some insights if your product's on the right kind of direction in terms of the benefits of what you expect, that's like a huge help for any cosmetic company. Mm-hmm. So that's how we end up like focusing more on the cosmetic industry. And that's when we got the opportunity to come to the US in 2016. Here in San Francisco, we found this accelerator that basically help like scientists to become entrepreneurs. So they coach like scientists how to start a company and build like a sustainable business.
Wow.
So that's why I came to the US in 2016. And then Alessandra, mm-hmm. my other co-founder, joined me later. Mm-hmm. The other two stayed in Brazil, but that's how we could keep this dream alive of mm-hmm. like translating the science and mm-hmm. finding the right resources to carry forward. And and that's how we actually started the OneSkin. So OneSkin came as an evolution of this first company,
right?
Based on this, where we saw like a market opportunity, mm-hmm. and we could utilize our expertise to address that market need.
Yeah, I remember being at a L'Oreal event and seeing the grown skin, as it were, in the petri dish.
Yeah, I was there with you, Jill. We had our lab coats on.
I know. Yes, that was here, but it looks very real.
Yeah. And if you come to OneSkin Lab, you can also see that.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
It's amazing. It's amazing. That was a real epiphany for me seeing that, because I think for so long, not to get too much into L'Oreal, but so many people just assume that they were testing on animals because they're such a large conglomerate company. Yeah. But in fact, they had, this similar research to what you were doing, and they just bought it out. They were like, they just brought it in house,
Yes.
So they've been doing that for a very long time. But that's amazing. I love this idea of like innovation and entrepreneurship among scientists. It actually helps to kind of democratize so other people have access as well. And it's interesting what you were saying about the incubator, that, you can definitely see this rise in science-backed mm-hmm. skincare, and, who knows what could be next. One of the things when I was doing research on OneSkin that really stood out to me, of course, I was reading the entire website. You have an extensive blog, by the way, on longevity, but it says our journey began with a simple question. Are any of the so-called anti-aging products on the market actually effective? To our surprise, most didn't promote real rejuvenation, and evaluating them in the lab, we discovered some were even harmful at the cellular level. So tell us what that means more specifically. Which ingredients would you personally never apply?
Yeah, so that was very interesting in the beginning of our journey. We came up with this hypothesis. Okay, everyone is interested in anti-aging. Are the products out there actually rejuvenating the skin? And one of the things that we could do to measure this rejuvenation effect is to measure what we call the skin's biological age. What we say like, okay, how functional this skin is, how healthy is the skin, more so than the chronological age of the skin. We all have our own biological age that's different from our chronological age and is largely influenced by our lifestyles and habits. So what we could do, we grow a skin in the lab, we can measure, hey, by reading the DNA of the skin, we can say this skin is like 4 years old. And then we can test any product and we can measure if a given product would reduce the age to 37 or maybe would accelerate the age of the skin. So we started testing products and very fast what we found, as you said, that most products could not reduce the age of the skin. Some of them could make your skin a little thicker in terms of the epidermal barrier, but the age of the skin, they were not actually reducing the age, and some of them were accelerating the age. And what we saw is that these ones that were accelerating the age, like we could see from a histology analysis, basically like a tissue transversal kind of section of the skin, that the cells started like basically to degenerate. We saw a lot of inflammation happening, and the epidermal or the skin barrier that should be thicker was getting thinner. So visually, and I can show you both of the histologies, it's very clear what is like a beautiful, healthy skin and what is skin that's, being affected by the toxicity of some ingredients. It's hard for me to name like specific ingredients.
I was going to say, name them.
Yeah.
Name them. We need to know.
Yeah, I mean, there are some products of some brands that we tested consistently and they produce this kind of toxic effect. And some are like the best selling in anti-aging, but like the old school brands.
Okay. Well, you don't have to name the brands, but
Yeah.
are there certain ingredients that you would never apply because you actually think that it's doing more harm than good?
Yeah, so in the end, it's a combination of like the ingredients, the concentrations, and so for example, there are certain preservatives that are like not as, I would say, safe for the skin. That obviously we know fragrances, some essential oils. For me, again, evaluating specific ingredients, it's a little hard. What we usually do is partner with other companies that do this job of like really evaluating the concentration of certain ingredients and basically claiming or if the product is safe or not safe. Like we work with other companies like the skin safe products that basically evaluate the concentration of heavy metals, things like that that can actually cause some toxicity. And we were also approved by the National Eczema Foundation, and there are other EWG is one that you can look more on an ingredient level. It's not, none of them are perfect. Some, obviously some people criticize, but I think for us, a lot of times we see a correlation of some of those products that are claimed not safe from those institutions. And when we test in the lab, we see that the skin is actually being affected by the toxicity. And even, Sephora has like the clean ingredients list. Like this is already a good, I would say, guidance. So I know that's hard for the consumer. We can, validate this in the lab, but I would use those sources as a guidance. I would say that in the end, it's all, the dose makes the poison.
So it
Okay.
sounds like it's more about the recipe of how the ingredients are put together or the formula is put together versus
Yes.
one bad guy ingredient.
Exactly.
So
And that's
yeah.
when
Yeah.
things get really tricky. And I can give you an example. When we are developing a formula, we have our hero ingredient, that's our peptide that we're going to talk about. But then we start adding new ingredients and we add like one, two, and we test in the skins. And a lot of times, like those two don't combine necessarily well with like our peptide. So to find synergy, it's really hard. A lot of times when you add more active ingredients, they are basically like neutralizing itself. And if you add too many actives, you can kind of cause some overreaction on your skin. So that's to me when it gets really tricky for formulators out there that don't have like these models to validate if all of those actives that they are adding is actually bringing more benefits, or if eventually they are, just potentially causing harm because it's too many of them. And I think we have seen this in the market with like skins that are, everyone is getting more sensitive because the people are overloading their skin with too many products, and then people end up like not having like a healthy barrier anymore. Yeah.
Let's talk about a rising buzzword, senescence. Now, the first time I heard this word was at a Chanel event in Paris. It was about a year ago. And that's when I learned that a lot of skincare scientists at very prestigious universities are currently studying senescence. And that's something we're starting to hear more about in the lexicon of skincare. So, in layperson's terms, can you explain what senescence means?
Yes, so senescence come from like the word senile, that means old. So a senescent cells means like an old cell. And usually a cell has like mainly three fates. Like this cell will divide and usually divides like around 50 times. And eventually when it reaches like this, what we call like a limit in terms of divisions, because the cells it's already very damaged, the cells should die, and or our body should basically reabsorb this cell because it's not functioning anymore. Or some of the cells enter in this senescent state that they can escape this death, pathway, and they can linger around. And 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 when they become senescent, basically what happens is that they are not functional anymore. So in the skin, for example, they are not producing collagen, they are not proliferated, they don't divide anymore. And on the flip side, what also happens is that they start secreting inflammation. And the inflammation that's coming from this, we also call them zombie cells because they are in this state like half dead, half alive. This inflammation that they secrete induces the cells around to become senescent as well, to age faster. So in the end, we like to compare this senescent cell with like a rotten apple in a bunch, that senescent cells is spoiling the good cells around. And that is what accelerates aging and causes like the signs of aging, the tissue dysfunction. And in the skin, the more senescent cells that we have, the more fine lines, wrinkles, sagging, and pigmentation issues we have.
Okay.
So what was the hypothesis? If we can reduce the load of these old cells in the skin, then we can make room for the healthy cells that are there to proliferate, produce more collagen, restore your barrier. And that's a targeted way to address aging because we are only affecting the bad cells. We are not disrupting the good cells. And that's a different approach than retinol and other acids work because retinol basically works by inducing cell renewal. So it will basically, remove the upper layers of your skin. The good and the bad cells are being renewed, but the senescent cells are still there in the dermal layer, and meaning that is still driving aging underneath. So it can promote like a better skin appearance in the short term because you're basically growing a fresher,
Right.
newer skin, but it's not addressing the cause, what's continue to spread the inflammation inside the skin.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like killing the zombie cells. So
Yeah. It's almost like
any
a
cells.
detox, right?
Yeah, exactly. And our body is able to do this when we are young, and even like process like autophagy, fasting is a good way that you can induce your body to recycle your old cells, your old proteins. But if you can help your own skin with like, additional uh, help to do this recycling process, that's like the best way that you maintain your skin healthy,
Mm-hmm.
younger, functional.
Right.
Carolina, you studied more than 900 peptides over 5 years to develop your key ingredient. What makes the peptide that you use so special in the pool of 900?
Yeah, and interesting enough about these zombie cells, they don't only accumulate in our skin, they accumulate in our whole body.
Mm-hmm.
And, and for example, they accumulate in our joints and they are associated with like osteoarthritis. So what we saw in the longevity field back in 2016 when we started OneSkin is that several companies were trying to decrease the amount of these aging cells, zombie cells in different tissues to prevent or address age-related diseases. And we thought, okay, why no one is trying to use this approach, reduce these zombie cells in the skin to prevent the skin aging? That's when we decided to research new peptides that would have this impact, specifically reducing the load of these aging cells in our skin. So we tested these 900s and basically we applied, 900 peptides and this took us like 4 years. It's a very extensive, research process in contact with these, old cells, senescent cells, and we measured which peptide could have the greatest effect in reducing the amount of those aging cells. And OS1 was the one that outperformed all of them. So OS1 basically reduces around 40% of the load of these aging cells in the skin, up to 40%. It varies. And what it does internally is, again, allows the healthy ones to replicate. It induces collagen production to a similar level than retinol does, but it does not induce any inflammation. It actually reduces inflammation. So we measure a lot of like inflammatory markers, for example, IL-6, IL-8, IL-1, and we see that these levels are reduced. And we also measure like aging genes, and we also see that these aging genes are being downregulated. So it's a very interesting result to show that, okay, by having fewer old cells, we are now like downregulating aging, downregulating inflammation, and we are upregulating collagen, hyaluronic acid. And again, naturally, you're going to have like a better looking skin, but just because we're addressing the main cause of this aging process. And the last piece that I'll share in terms of like, we measure the age reduction, and we could see that we reduced the age in 2.5 years by treating the skin with this peptide. And this was in a lab study, so was over 5 days. It's obviously a very controlled condition, but it is the first time that a molecule is measured to be able to reduce the age of the skin. And even retinol was not yet validated, at least from this standpoint analysis of like measuring the molecular age to be able to reduce the age of the skin, which is very exciting. I think it shows that yes, aging is malleable, and if you know where you can intervene, you can actually achieve that biologically younger skin.
Yeah.
So the skin that you were testing on, are you able to engineer it in such a way that it starts out at 45 years old, and then at the end you're like, oh, it's 43, or like,
Yeah. So for this experiment, we used actually biopsies from
oh wow,
older individuals. So these ones that we used were actually like 75 years old. And after, or 71, actually, this is published in our peer-reviewed journal. It's available on our website. So at the 71-year-old skin, after the treatment was like 68.5. So we could measure this using an algorithm that we also published and basically quantifies this molecular age.
Now, peptides have been around for a long time. We've heard of this ingredient in skincare, I mean, since I was a baby beauty editor, but it has become more buzzy of late. So, as a consumer, other than just buying OneSkin, like
Yeah.
whether it's a legit formula or not, you know?
Yeah, I would say, I mean, there is a ton of peptides out there. And for those, I imagine most of your audience knows, but like for those who doesn't know, peptide, it's this small chain of amino acids. So it's the building blocks of a protein. And the way that they can work in products like cosmetics, they can function as a messenger. So they can get inside the cell or the skin, and they can activate the cell to behave in a certain way. In our case, for example, our peptide induces like DNA repair pathways and other pathways that are going to reduce inflammation and so forth. So I think the difference is compared to our peptide and others out there. I think for a lot of the peptides out there, you need to understand first, are they going to penetrate the skin? Depending on the size of this peptide, they may not even get into the skin. Second, is the peptide stable? Can the peptide, be active after long periods, inside the product, on the shelf, different temperatures, different pHs. And the only way that I think you can know that is seeing like, okay, is there any research available? Can you ask like the brands, even if they don't have published on their website, because most don't, maybe, email them and ask, hey, do you have any data showing the efficacy of this peptide? And most of them, I would say, you share the information from their suppliers. But when you add the peptide inside a formula, again, you needed to test it again because you needed to see if in that specific formula, if the peptide is going to continue to be active after a certain period of time. So I don't know if I'm helping, but I think the best way
Yeah.
is to go to the website and hopefully try to see some data, some research. And if they don't have, try to email them directly.
well, before we move on, I need to ask you about the body supplement, the body topical supplement, which has been served to me in an Instagram ad. And the person it's like a before and after, and it's one of those slings where it slides over. And Carlene and
Yes.
I think you saw it as well, Carlene.
Yes.
Yeah, I hit the DMs. I sent it to Jill and I was like, is this real life? Because on the one side, it's so crepey and wrinkly. Like
It
no,
looks like my
Yes.
mom's arm. Bless,
no
like,
offense to anyone, but it
Yes.
does look like
Yeah.
the woman's arm is, probably like 80 or something like that, like very crepey. And then the
and
thing
slack,
slides.
and it's like
Yeah.
slack,
And then it slides over and it looks like my arm. And I'm like, excuse me? And I
I
said to Jill,
know.
I was like, is this real?
I know, and we can share because she posted. She's a mom of an influencer, and basically this influencer was doing a review of their products of I think it was 2024, and they both were sharing like kind of organically like which products are it's working for you. And her mom basically shared this before and afters, and she's like 65, and I was also very shocked like with the difference. And we have seen with the body similar results in terms of like helping crepey skin.
Mm-hmm.
And it's basically and it's also after 5 months of treatment, so it's not nothing something that you can
Not
Right.
overnight.
It's not
Yeah.
overnight.
overnight.
Right, right.
But the body lotion, people are obsessed, and mainly people that are going through this menopause phase, that your
Yeah.
skin start to get like more thin and crepey. Again, it contains the peptide. It has a lot of ceramides, and it has
Mm-hmm.
other ingredients that can help with like the skin thickness, the
Mm-hmm.
epidermal layer. We have a lot of data showing that improve the thickness of the epidermis and improve the barrier of the skin. And it's a beautiful lotion because, again, absorbs really well. It's very hydrating and it's not greasy at
Yeah.
all. So if
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
you,
I saw that picture and I was like, I'm putting it on my face.
yes,
I mean, I'll put it all over my body, but I'm also putting it on my face.
yeah.
Yeah.
What's next from the brand?
Um,
What's around the corner? Can you tell
Yeah.
us?
I mean, there's so many exciting things coming up. Uh, this year we have like three exciting launches. Unfortunately, I cannot share them yet,
Mm.
but we have been doing so much research. There is a new category that we are really excited to bring to our community. Yeah, I
Okay.
it's coming, it's coming.
All
So
right.
stay
Well,
tuned.
keep us on your mailing list.
Yes.
We need to talk to you a little bit about some of your brand positioning and how you've, identified yourselves, which is as longevity scientists. And we know that this is just a huge term in terms of where we're going in not just skincare, but healthcare and tech and all kinds of things. So given that you've studied this, and this is the whole idea, to be clear about the quest for extending a person's health span. You've studied immunity. You're into this concept of longevity. What do you think legitimately could be just around the corner for us as a human race?
I study stem cell biology, and one of the areas that I really think that's exciting right now, it's like PRPs, or
Mm-hmm.
platelet-rich plasma, that you
Mm-hmm.
can, if you have like a healthy, organism. And so PRP basically means that you draw your blood, you spin it down, and the plasma that's rich like in growth factors, you can inject in a certain area that you need to promote healing. So for example, I have some knee kind of injury, and then I did already like PRP injections in my knees, and that helps like speed up like the healing process. And you could do the same with stem cells. The stem cells, it's not as simple as just drawing your blood. So, and in the US, is still not very uh, accepted in clinics. So some people go to, out, go out of the country to do those treatments. But we know that stem cells have this, power of secreting a lot of like anti-inflammatory and regenerative, factors. So I think this is very fascinating that we can already start using this today. And
Mm-hmm.
I don't think many people know about that, right? How many people you know around yourself that has trouble like with like movements, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
they cannot and these are things that we should be able to avoid if we start like preventing those injuries early on.
Mm-hmm.
um, Other
Mm-hmm.
technologies that I think it's interesting is about either cancer detection that early on, or like
Mm-hmm.
the full body MRI, similar to,
Totally agree.
yeah. So these
Mm-hmm.
are things that are more on the preventative side.
Mm-hmm.
That okay, some of them are still expensive, but all of them are getting more accessible in terms of um, you know, uh, being available to regular customers. I think understanding your biological markers in a deeper way. There are
Mm-hmm.
many companies that are evaluating this
Mm-hmm.
today. So you draw your blood and you assess like 100 biomarkers, and you can
Mm-hmm.
get already insights. So I think this is the near-term benefits that we're already seeing from the longevity kind of research.
Yeah.
And I think long-term, we will see things that are more that have a higher, intervention in our bodies,
Mm-hmm.
but then you need the safety to be,
Yeah,
validated first, and that
definitely.
what takes a little bit of time.
Now, have you been watching the Netflix documentary Don't Die, The Man Who Wants to Live Forever?
I have not watched it yet,
Okay. Okay.
I'm very familiar with Brian Johnson, and
Okay.
obviously he's a well-known figure in this longevity
Yeah, I
space.
was curious what you thought about it. I'm about halfway through, and he's spending about 2 million a year, tracking his every waking minute of how he can optimize his health span to in this
Yeah,
attempt to live longer or live forever. So, um,
yeah.
what do you think? Like, by the time the next century rolls around, how long do you think we're going to be able to live for?
Yeah, and that's honestly one of the areas that I personally don't think too much about, because
Oh, okay.
as a scientist in the longevity space, our goal is to live as healthy as long as possible. So you
Okay.
could live until 80, 90, 100, or 120. Um, as long as you are compressing the time that you are sick or debilitated. I think naturally, as you extend the healthy span, that's the time that you're healthy, eventually you'll be extending lifespan. I personally don't really, think much about like how long I want to live. As long as like I'm healthy, I'm like fine, and that's my main goal. Going back to Brian Johnson, I think what he's doing is interesting from a standpoint that, okay, he wants to measure, he wants to test every single approach that's out there, and eventually he wants to share like what worked for him, and basically share the knowledge. And obviously now he's coming up with products, and there is
Yeah.
not only, but I think in many ways he's doing, I'd say, some kind of service in doing this himself, in terms of like testing and learning, and a lot of the information is out there, available for people. Obviously, m- most humans will not go through the journey that he is going through, in terms of how rigorous is his, life and lifestyle. But I think some of the takeaways of the learnings are applicable to the regular consumer, the regular person out there, and I think it's helpful. I think it's good information that can help us in some ways to learn more, like what interventions could already be implemented by a regular person. And even him, he started like really rigorous, and now he's basically getting more flexible, because that's not sustainable, right? No one can live that life like forever. So I think obviously is a way that he got it to attract a lot of media attention and
Hmm.
etc. And but honestly, I see, in terms of like positive, whatever learnings he can share that eventually can be helpful for other people. I think that
So I think
Okay.
longevity, it's this next era of wellness. And, what we've seen in wellness though is that there's as many hoaxes as there are science backed ideas. And as we enter longevity and we start talking about things like stem cells and PRP and monetizing, and there are some ideas that like aging is a disease I've often seen at these longevity conferences, which I don't know if I personally agree with. So, is there a topic around longevity that you think might be more myth than fact based, or that could be a watch out for our listeners?
yeah, I would say that in general, obviously, longevity is becoming a hot trend, and a lot of people can take advantage of that. And as a longevity scientist, the main question that we have, or the way that we distinguish longevity from wellness, it needs to be evidence based. It needs to be really data backed. So I think anyone that's claiming to be doing something that it's improving longevity, you needed to have a way to prove that, ideally with like a clinical studies, but at least like obviously in vitro studies as well. I think the question of aging being considered a disease, I think it's more to have FDA potentially allowing you to have trials for aging. So, for example, if I want to get my product FDA approved, there is no way because skin aging is not a condition, right? So,
Mm-hmm.
and I don't know if it should be, honestly. I know that this would bring a lot of implications, but we have all the data and the ability to get this be approved by FDA if skin aging was a condition that we want to show that we can treat. I don't know if it's the best path, but for the consumer and society, I don't think we need to consider aging as a disease. I think aging is still this beautiful process, and what we want to treat is the health decay that's associated with aging, right? And unfortunately, right now they are both connected. Even we talk about aging at a cellular level, like a cell that's aging, it's becoming not functional anymore. So it would require a really, I would say, a big discussion in terms of like the cultural understanding of aging and if there is a better term. But overall, I think my main message is it's about like make sure that if there is a longevity treatment being like advertised, ask for the data behind the evidence behind it to make sure that it's worth investing.
And our last question for you, what health span practices beyond skincare do you live by as your personal longevity routine?
Yeah, I'm excited to be part of this, road that I'm so passionate about because I get to see some of these new things and I try myself. I think I would definitely start with the basics, which we know that the ones that the most impact our health, which are basically free right now, is kind of sleep, exercise, a diet that is, more anti-inflammatory, um, you know, few or no processed food as much as possible. Uh, Controlling stress, that's one challenging one for me, running a company. I've done other things that are a little more biohacker style, like using a glucose monitor to really understand which foods can impact my glucose. And that these are those small things that in the end can lead to insulin resistance, but we have no idea because they are so small on a daily basis. And if you understand this, you can adjust your diet. I bet you are familiar with the glucose revolution and and there are so many like interesting hacks there that can already help you. I'm also about like measuring again my biomarkers and I haven't done the full body MRI yet, but I want to do that. But for me, as much as possible, I try to measure things and then try to see, even with sleep, for example, like which kind of supplement. I love like my Whoop and I have an 8 sleep and like which kind of supplements or practices can help, me to improve my REM, my deep sleep. Uh, but yeah, I would say stick with like if you stick with the basics like exercise and diet and I think on exercise, there's this we needed to be stressing our body a little bit, so make sure that you do not necessarily the HIIT. You don't need to go all the way to the kind of high intensive interval training, but you needed to push your body like a few times a week in inducing what's going to promote like the mitochondria like renewal. Andrew Huberman talks a lot about this for those who are interested. But those are, quick things that you can do on your routine that helps. And I try to keep them on my my daily basis. And I think the last one is meditation, that really helps me to be grounded and make sure that I'm not overreacting when kind of a challenge situation comes up.
Yeah.
It's
That's
always
great.
about the basics. You can
Yeah.
do all these tests. You can go for the
Yes.
MRI. It
Yes.
doesn't actually matter. They're going to tell
Yes.
you exercise, sleep,
Yeah.
don't drink, eat as
Yes.
few processed foods as possible, get your body moving. But the truth is, people are like, boring, don't want to hear it.
What's
Exactly.
the
That
supplement?
is
I want to know
true.
the supplement.
They want the silver bullet.
They want the
bullet,
yeah, the
That's it.
magic
Yeah.
bullet, right? And it's
Exactly.
like that's very North
Give me
American
that
too.
nudge. Yeah.
Right, but it's not necessarily. It's like that ounce of prevention is, worth the pound of cure for sure. So, we really appreciate your time today, Carolina. It's such a fascinating topic and conversation. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Carolina.
Thank you, Jill and Carlene. This was a wonderful conversation.